On September 22, 1985, five of the most powerful finance ministers on earth walked through the gilded lobby of the Plaza Hotel in New York City. They arrived discreetly. They left by all outward appearances, having accomplished little of consequence, what they had actually done in a single afternoon behind closed doors was rearrange the economic destiny of a nation. That nation was Japan. And what happened inside that room is the single most important thing you need to understand about what China is doing to America's economy right now, quietly, patiently, and with a precision that most people watching the news will never fully grasp. Here is what took place. America in 1985 was hemorrhaging. Japanese cars filled American driveways. Japanese electronics filled American living rooms. Japanese steel was undercutting American workers at every turn. The trade deficit had become politically unsustainable, and Washington wanted it closed, but not through negotiation. Not through tariffs, through the currency. The agreement reached that afternoon, now known as the Plaza Accord, compelled Japan to allow the yen to appreciate dramatically against the dollar. Japan's finance minister signed it. The markets responded within hours, and the yen strengthened by nearly 50% over the following 2 years. What had appeared to be a reasonable currency correction turned into an economic guillotine. Japan's export-driven economy buckled. The Bank of Japan slashed interest rates to compensate, flooding the system with cheap money. Asset bubbles formed in real estate and equities of a scale almost incomprehensible in retrospect, and then they collapsed. Japan entered what historians now call the lost decade. Some argue, not without evidence, that the lost decade never truly ended. Here is the part of this story that changes everything you think you know about China. China was watching the Plaza Hotel meeting in 1985 very closely. And for the 4 decades since, every major economic decision Beijing has made has been shaped, consciously and deliberately, by one animating question: how do we ensure that America can never do to China what it did to Japan at the Plaza Hotel? That question is not historical curiosity. It is the operating code of the world's second largest economy. And the answers China has been building toward are now visible, measurable, and moving fast enough that their consequences will reach into your retirement account, your mortgage payment, and the purchasing power of every dollar you have saved. If what you are about to hear concerns you, and it should, then the most important thing you can do right now is subscribe to Big Cycles, because this is a story that does not end with this video. The next chapter is already being written. China today holds approximately $682 billion in United States Treasury bonds. Let that number settle for a moment. $682 billion. A decade ago, that number was $1.3 trillion. China has been selling month after month, year after year, not with dramatic announcements, not with press conferences, but with the calm, methodical deliberateness of an institution that has made up its mind and sees no reason to advertise the fact. In 2022 alone, China divested $173 billion in US Treasury debt. In 2023, another $50 billion. In 2024, another $57 billion. The pace has barely slowed entering 2026. This is not portfolio rebalancing in any ordinary sense. This is a sovereign nation systematically withdrawing from the architecture of American financial dominance. The mechanism matters enormously because it is the mechanism that connects China's decisions to your wallet. When China sells United States Treasury bonds and does not replace them with new purchases, it removes a buyer from the market for American debt. America issues new debt constantly, relentlessly. The gross national debt now stands at $39.2 trillion as of June 2026, an increase of nearly $3 trillion in a single year. Every day, the United States borrows approximately $8 billion more than it takes in. It needs buyers for that debt. When there are fewer buyers, the government must offer higher yields to attract the ones who remain. When yields rise, the cost of carrying $39 trillion in outstanding obligations rises with them. The 30-year Treasury yield recently touched 5.1%. Interest payments on the federal debt reached 1. $0.2 trillion in fiscal year 2025, more than the United States spends on Medicare, more than it spends on national defense, and every basis point those yields climb from here makes the arithmetic more severe. Now consider what China is simultaneously doing with the money it is no longer parking in American debt. It is buying gold. China's central bank has now increased its gold reserves for 13 consecutive months. Its official gold holdings have reached 74 million troy ounces and rising. But more significantly, China recently announced what can only be described as an audacious institutional ambition, a gold custodianship program positioning Beijing as the reserve bank for nations that wish to hold their sovereign wealth outside the Western financial system entirely. Not simply diversifying its own reserves, offering to diversify the reserves of others. Building, in other words, a parallel financial architecture, a different store, across the street from the one America has run since 1944. To understand why, you need to remember one date, February 2022. That is when the United States, European Union, and their allies froze $300 billion in Russian central bank assets held in Western financial institutions. Whatever one's views on the geopolitical justifications, the financial precedent was seismic. Every central bank on earth that held reserves in dollars, euros, or Western custodial systems was suddenly forced to confront a reality that had previously existed only in theoretical risk assessments. Dollar-denominated assets inside the Western system are not unconditionally safe. They can be frozen overnight by political decision. Without warning, China absorbed that lesson with the attentiveness of a nation that had been preparing for precisely this kind of moment for 40 years. If the Plaza Accord was the event that taught Beijing the danger of currency vulnerability, the Russian asset freeze was the event that confirmed the danger of custodial vulnerability. And so China is not attacking the dollar. It is not declaring economic war. It is doing exactly what any rational actor does upon discovering that the bank holding its money has a history of freezing accounts when sufficiently provoked. It is moving its money slowly, carefully, and building its own bank. There is a question here that deserves to be asked plainly, and big cycles will ask it while others demur. If you were managing China's central bank with $682 billion in American Treasury bonds, and you had watched the United States freeze $300 billion of Russian sovereign assets in a single weekend, would you keep adding to that position? Would you trust that America's long-term fiscal trajectory, $39 trillion in debt, $1.2 trillion in annual interest payments, deficits projected to exceed $2 trillion every year for the next decade, would you trust that the dollar's purchasing power would protect your nation's wealth? The honest answer is no, and China's behavior over the past decade makes clear that Beijing arrived at that same answer years ago. The dollar has already lost roughly 25% of its purchasing power since 2020, not because of any single announcement, not because of any visible crisis, because of a mechanism that operates in the background, on schedule, quietly, the compounding effect of fiscal deficits, debt monetization, and the gradual erosion of the confidence that makes reserve currencies worth holding in the first place. The people who have grasped this most clearly are not the ones making the most noise on cable television. They are the world's central banks, which bought gold at the fastest rate in half a century over the past 2 years. They are the institutional investors quietly shortening duration on dollar exposure. They are the sovereign wealth funds that have been watching China's moves with the careful attention of players who understand that what is happening is not a temporary adjustment, but a structural realignment of the global monetary order. Japan did not see what was coming when its finance minister picked up the pen at the Plaza Hotel. The agreement seemed manageable. The consequences were generational. China has had 40 years to study that lesson, and the study appears to have been thorough. What Beijing has constructed is not a weapon. It is a patient alternative. A slow accumulation of options, a gradual reduction of dependency, a quiet construction of the infrastructure needed to matter less, much less what Washington decides to do with the dollar, with interest rates, with trade policy, or with the financial assets of sovereign nations that find themselves on the wrong side of American foreign policy. That day when China needs America's financial system less than America needs China's continued participation in it is not tomorrow. But the data available right now, the Treasury holdings down from 1.3 trillion to 682 billion. The gold reserves up 13 consecutive months, the 30-year yield. At 5% on 39 trillion in debt, the net interest bill exceeding $1 trillion annually, all of it points in one direction. The arc of this story is not ambiguous. The timeline is the only question. Here is what this means for you specifically. Your mortgage rate is priced off Treasury yields. Your car loan is priced off Treasury yields. The return on your savings account, the sustainability of Social Security, the purchasing power of the pension or 401,000 you have been contributing to for decades, all of it exists inside a system whose stability depends on the continued willingness of the world to hold dollars and buy American debt. China's steady withdrawal from that system is one of the most consequential economic stories of our generation. It is happening in the background on a timeline of years and decades rather than news cycles, and the people making decisions based on it are not the ones you see most often on television. So here is what Big Cycles wants you to weigh in on. Put aside the diplomatic answer. Set aside what you think you are supposed to say. If you were running China's central bank with $682 billion in American Treasury bonds, and you had watched the United States freeze $300 billion of Russian sovereign assets in 72 hours, would you save the dollar or let it burn? Drop your answer in the comments below. The most thoughtful response gets featured in next week's episode. Because next Tuesday we go deeper into the recession that your 401,000 insists is not happening, while your grocery bill insists that it is. One of those numbers is telling the truth. We will find out which one. And remember, this is for education and discussion only, not personal financial advice. I am sharing a way to think through the history, the market, and the ownership questions so you can make your own decisions with your own money and your own risk in mind.